The London Underground is the primary mode of transport within London, but to fully understand its effect, we need to take a trip all the way back to 1845, where London was the largest city in the world with a population of less than 2.5 million people. Despite that being nearly a quarter of today's population, it was significantly more overcrowded on the streets, and it had a constant layer of thick fog, and the River Thames was full of sewage. The streets had barely any space to navigate, with thousands either walking or using a horse and carriage to get themselves from place A to place B, and it was these horses that helped increase disease within the city and contributed to the disgusting state that London was in. The only real roads were the sort of like narrow paths exclusively for walking that had been built centuries prior. At the time there was a city solicitor by the name of Charles Pearson, who we must all thank for the tube, as it was in 1845 where he first suggested the idea of making an underground railway. The Metropolitan Railway Company, now known as the Metropolitan Line, was opened, but not to the scale that it is today. During construction, workers were faced with multiple challenges, but the main one being that the only trains in the country at the time operated with steam engines, and if you were to put these steam engines inside a tunnel, then people would be poisoned by the fumes that the steam trains, released. And a simple fix to this was to add 2 large tanks to the side of the train, which would hold the steam for a little while for it to eventually be let out safely. But how would they let out the steam? They couldn't just release it into the tunnels, that would be completely pointless. So to explain how they did this, you have to take a short visit to Leinster Gardens. So it looks fairly normal as you walk down this road, until you realise that this building on the left has curtains, yes, and then, suddenly this bit is boarded up windows, painted white, no letterboxes. I wonder why that would be, and it's only when you go up do you find out that we're being pranked by the government, and they're hiding a hole in the ground that was used back then to get rid of the steam in the tanks and release it safely into the air. If you follow what is now the Circle and District lines back, you can see many holes in the ground for this exact purpose, just not as well hidden as this one. After 2 long years of construction, the line was only 5 kilometres long and went from Paddington to Farringdon, and only went through 7 stations. It was a huge success that led on to extensions of both sides of the line to be constructed. In 1868, a new company, the Metropolitan and District Railway, decided to make its own line, originally from Westminster to South Kensington, but quickly got extended east and west, and then a little up north to link with the Metropolitan line at High Street, Kensington. In 1884, the Central Circle was completed, as both of the competing companies met at Mansion House. Now this forms what we know today as the Circle Line. So far everything had been built with a method known as cut and cover, which was just digging a trench and putting a roof over it basically. But because they were digging up the roads to make the trench in the first place, the construction of the tube network was contributing to the overcrowded state of London rather than reducing it like initially planned. Their solution to this was just dig deeper, which also presented itself a major challenge, this being, if they dug deeper, they couldn't vent the steam anymore. In 1879, the Germans had been thinking up a never-before-seen method of powering trains, and this was to use electricity. Electrifying the tube would cost an incredible amount of money, and it was money that the city didn't really have. But a few miles away, on a small little island called America, a powerful businessman by the name of Charles Tyson Yerkes had heard of the struggles that the tube was having and decided to just fund the entire project, which also included building what was at the time the world's largest power station. 1890 introduced the first proper deep level tube line, the City and South London Railway, now known as a segment of the Northern Line, and only stretched a few kilometres. In 1900, what is now known as the Central Line was constructed between Shepherd's Bush in the west and Bank in the east. 1906 saw the opening of the Bakerloo Line and the Piccadilly Line, with more deep level stations and lines opening. It was a huge ask to keep making these people walk down hundreds of steps, whether it's 10 steps or 500 steps. It's the equivalent of a 15-storey building, so we can't be making the public do this every time, We had to find a solution. So we took another American design known as the escalator, and today there are over 450 of them on the entire network. Also, fast forward a wee bit, in 1933, graphic designer Harry Beck decided that the current tube map wasn't as good as it could be. He then revolutionised subway maps around the globe, starting with the London Underground. He devised a map that would only use straight and diagonal lines. It was originally rejected, but after lots of persuasion, it was finally released to the public and was an instant success. Now, we all know that World War I took place between 1914 and 1918, and you may be wondering, why am I mentioning it? What significance does this have? Well, it provided a deep level shelter from the bombs that were destroying the city above. Originally, believe it or not, the police actually tried to prevent people from sheltering on the platforms. The desperate population just ignored them and bought tickets to sleep safely. After realising that the people just weren't going to go anywhere, the tube staff decided to cater them converting trains into snack carriages basically that would come along into the stations along the line, providing food and drink to the people seeking shelter. The entire process was then obviously repeated again when the Second World War took place from 1939 to 1945. From 1968 to 1971, the Victoria line was opened in segments from Walthamstow Central to Brixton, and it hasn't changed its route since it opened. In 1979, the tube was graced with a brand new line called the Jubilee Line, and it ran from Stanmore to Charing Cross, and it wasn't until 1999 when the Jubilee Line extension was finished all the way up to Stratford. Now I know the Elizabeth Line isn't part of the Underground, shut up, it's on the tube map, so I'm going to cover it briefly. The Elizabeth Line is a 100-kilometre long track going from Reading in the west to the core of London to Abbeywood and Shenfield in the east. Construction began in 2009. It was meant to finish 4 years ago in 2018, but obviously we all know how that went. The future of the tube is uncertain. There is an overground extension from Barking to Barking Riverside currently being built. You can see it on the tube map here. In 2025, we might see a brand new fleet of Piccadilly Line trains. These will be able to support 15% more capacity, and they're going to have aircon, which will be a first on deep level tube lines. During the 2030s, we can see all manner of things. We can see Crossrail 2 either open or begin its construction process, and it plans to link multiple mainline stations, Victoria, Seven Sisters, all of these. But the most notable link, in my opinion, will be Euston St Pancras and King's Cross, and it will basically be one mega station on beneath Somerstown. An Elizabeth Line extension could also happen in the early 2030s from Abbeywood to Gravesend. A long-planned Bakerloo Line extension south to Lewisham and north to Watford Junction could also be opening during the late 2030s, with another Bakerloo Line extension down to Hayes in the mid-2040s. Most of these are just plans at the moment and may not even happen, but they're out there and would be an amazing addition to the network. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye my friends. Bye bye.